John Dewey and the Origins of Western Democracy. The term democracy is often incorrectly applied to governmental systems in the United States and other Western nations, despite clear historical and theoretical evidence that such systems do not meet the criteria for true democracy. The Federalist Papers explicitly warn against the dangers of democratic governance, emphasizing that democracies tend to be short-lived, unstable, and prone to violent dissolution. James Madison, in Federalist No. 10, argues that pure democracy is inherently susceptible to factionalism, where the majority can impose its will on the minority without restraint. The founders and framers of the United States Constitution deliberately rejected democracy in favor of a constitutional republic, recognizing the instability and volatility associated with democratic rule. Benjamin Franklin succinctly articulated this concern when he stated that democracy is akin to two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner, illustrating that majority rule alone does not equate to justice or fairness, never mind any viable approach towards the utopian vision of equity that seems so pervasive in modern society. Historical examples demonstrate that democratic systems have often enabled the oppression of minority groups, either through majority rule or by allowing small but influential minorities to manipulate democratic processes for their own benefit. The exclusionary nature of ancient Athenian democracy. The post-revolutionary era in France, the Reconstruction and Jim Crow periods in the United States, and the Weimar Republic's democratic collapse in Germany provide clear evidence of democracy facilitating oppression. In ancient Athens, democracy was limited strictly to male citizens, excluding women, slaves, and non-citizens from participation in governance. The Athenian democracy functioned on the principle of direct majority rule, often leading to decisions that oppressed or marginalized those who had no political rights. The treatment of Socrates, who was condemned to death by popular vote, illustrates how democratic mechanisms could be used to suppress dissenting voices rather than protect them. During the French Revolution, the democratic ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity quickly devolved into the Reign of Terror between 1793 and 1794. Under the rule of the Jacobins, the elected government engaged in mass executions of perceived political enemies, using democratic authority to justify widespread oppression. The shift from a monarchy to a republic initially promised greater representation but instead allowed factions to wield democratic power as a tool for political purges. The Weimar Republic, which lasted from 1919 to 1933 in Germany, is yet another example of democracy enabling oppression. Democratic elections and parliamentary processes were manipulated by extremist factions, including the Nazi Party, which used democratic means to gain control and dismantle the system from within. Once in power, the Nazis maintained a facade of democratic legitimacy while implementing oppressive policies against political opponents, Jews, and other marginalized groups. These cases demonstrate that democracy, when left unchecked or unrestrained by constitutional safeguards, can be used as a tool for oppression rather than protection. The assumption that democracy inherently promotes justice or safeguards minority rights is historically contradicted by instances in which majoritarian rule or small but organized factions have wielded democratic systems to justify exclusion, persecution, and violence. Modern democratic systems, even when constrained by constitutional frameworks, still allow for the possibility of oppression by the majority or even by an influential minority capable of manipulating democratic processes. This seeming paradox undermines the common assumption that democracy inherently protects individual rights. Instead, democracy can and most likely will, given human nature, function as a mechanism through which power is concentrated and used against vulnerable groups. The continued tendency to mischaracterize Western governmental systems as democracies obscures the reality that they operate under principles designed to restrain the excesses of direct democratic rule. So where does the modern focus on democracy originate? Before the early 20th century, the term democracy rarely occurred in textbooks or other factual or non-fiction works other than as an examination and analysis of actual democracies. It was only in the early 20th century that freer societies began being incorrectly labeled as democratic. John Dewey emerged as an influential intellectual and earned his role in American history in part by significantly expanding the definition of democracy, pushing it beyond its previous association with governmental systems. Before Dewey's influence, the term democracy was seldom used in the United States, and when it was primarily limited to historical discussions of failed democracies or used in more critical analyses of history. Few thinkers at the time considered democracy as an intrinsic component of the nation's own political identity, and even fewer connected it to broader societal values, especially in relationship to constitutional republics or parliamentary monarchies. Dewey, building on the foundational ideas of pragmatism, reoriented American thought toward a more inclusive and functional interpretation of democracy, which is in large part the cause of the factual confusion in the modern era. His philosophy of pragmatism, also known as instrumentalism, emphasized that ideas should be treated as instruments or tools for addressing real-world problems, rather than abstract concepts. This view extended to his beliefs about education, where he argued that learning should be based on direct, experiential engagement rather than passive absorption of facts. His educational theories, presented in works like Democracy and Education published in 1916, highlighted the need for participatory, hands-on learning environments that prepare individuals to engage meaningfully in democratic society. Dewey also advanced these pragmatist principles into social and political philosophy, calling for active, ongoing democratic participation in the public and its problems. Published in 1927, he argued that democracy is not merely a system of governance but an active, dynamic process that requires continual inquiry and social reform. For Dewey, democracy was an evolving way of life, continuously reconstructed through human interaction, deliberation, and collective problem-solving. He viewed democracy not as an ideal to be attained but as a method of engagement that must be refined and adapted through experience and inquiry, making his work foundational to both educational reform and progressive social and political movements in the United States. In literal or definitive terms, what Dewey incorrectly deemed to be democracy would by all rights be more correctly and accurately viewed merely as civic participation of the polity. Dewey, in his writings, introduced a supposed variant of democracy as an active process of social engagement, education, and continuous inquiry not directly related to the governance of the nation. His approach emphasized the dynamic interaction that should remain open between citizens and their institutions, thereby challenging the prevailing notion that democracy was merely a static set of procedures and formal governmental structures. Dewey proposed that democracy should be understood as a mode of living that nurtures the growth and development of individuals through participation and collaboration in the public sphere. He argued that a truly democratic society required an ongoing process of critical reflection and experimentation, whereby ideas were constantly tested through their practical consequences. John Dewey's works, particularly in the fields of education, democracy, and social philosophy, offer much to be learned about the ways in which individuals and societies can benefit from a more engaged and thoughtful approach to knowledge and governance in modern society. Dewey's educational philosophy, which emphasizes learning through experience, stands in stark contrast to the modern Western educational systems that prioritize standardized testing and rote memorization. In Dewey's view, education should be about fostering critical thinking and practical problem-solving skills, rather than simply preparing students to regurgitate information on tests. His focus on experiential learning allows for a deeper, more meaningful understanding of concepts, encouraging students to actively engage with their environment and apply what they learn to real-world situations. This approach, which advocates for hands-on learning, critical inquiry, and collaborative work is far more beneficial to individuals and society than the current trend of teaching to the test, which often neglects the practical application of knowledge and the deeper lessons that can be derived from educational experiences. Dewey's emphasis on civic participation also remains highly relevant and beneficial in any modern societal system. His belief in active civic participation as an imperative and ongoing process requiring citizen involvement is a keen observation, but not representative of democracy in any precise definition of the word. Dewey understood that society depends on individuals actively participating in discussions, making informed decisions, and contributing to the collective well-being of their communities. This concept of active engagement is crucial in fostering a society that values open discourse, mutual respect, and the ongoing evolution of social structures to meet the needs of the polity. Dewey's approach provides a framework for enhancing civic participation in modern societies, advocating for continuous dialogue and thoughtful participation in civic life. However, while Dewey's ideas offer considerable insight into the functional roles of education and democracy, his improper use of pre-existing terms has, at times, led to confusion and hindered productive debate in public discourse. Dewey's redefinition of concepts like democracy, while innovative, was often unorthodox and at times failed to account for the complexities and historical baggage associated with these terms. Never mind the accuracy of the language and the division the incorrect labeling resulted in within modern discourse. By reinterpreting long-standing terms and principles, Dewey inadvertently opened the door for ambiguity and confusion, which has since been exploited by various movements or ideologies seeking to advance particular agendas at the expense of clarity and understanding. In particular, Dewey's use of the term democracy to describe a broad, participatory social and political system has, in some instances, contributed to the dilution of its meaning, leading to debates that focus more on the term and its reinterpretation rather than on substantive issues facing free societies. Furthermore, the application of Dewey's ideas without a nuanced understanding of their original intent has sometimes led to ideological polarization rather than unity, particularly when debates are framed around definitions and interpretations rather than practical outcomes based on precise language and meaningful discourse based on factual truth. While Dewey's works provide invaluable insights into how education and democracy can function more effectively through experiential learning and active civic participation, his redefinition of established terms has, at times, created confusion that has undermined productive discourse in modern society. The challenge lies not in the substance of Dewey's ideas, but in how his conceptual innovations have been applied or misinterpreted within the broader context of public debate and the resolution of modern societal challenges.
Please like, share, subscribe, and comment below.